Welcome to Season 6 of the Stories in the Cemetery podcast. This season, we're shaking things up a bit with deeper questions into the paranormal. And to do that, your host, Nicholas McGurr, has invited the owner of Tales from a ghost hunter, Joshua Amen, to be his co-host. To learn more about their studies and articles, visit storiesinthecemetery.com, or you can check out the Paranormal Investigation Workbook or the Paranormal Investigator's Almanac, both available on Amazon. Stories in the Cemetery takes you ghost hunting in Charleston, South Carolina, and reveals his findings from those investigations here on the Stories in the Cemetery podcast. Let's get into today's episode with Nick and Josh.
Is it on your bucket list to go ghost hunting with real paranormal equipment like you see on your favorite paranormal TV shows? You're in luck. Your host of the Stories in the Cemetery podcast also runs an interactive ghost hunting experience in Charleston, South Carolina. You use all the equipment, spirit boxes, EMF meters, paranormal cameras, and more, all while running different paranormal experiments at each location. This includes live EVP sessions, the Estes Method, and well, you'll just have to come experience this one-of-a-kind event for yourself. Nightly investigations available to small groups of 10 all year long. So head over to storiesinthecemetery.com to book your investigation.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 52. And I am Nick, and this is...
Josh Amen with Tales from a Ghost Hunter.
Hey, Josh. Welcome back as the co-host. Thank you for coming back. I won't lie. I've had other people that I've talked to about being co-hosts on this show, and either they never showed or they didn't make it. So, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we can kind of chuckle about it. I mean, life events do happen. And I think, like, when I had Amy on the show, like, she was a great co-host because she loved her research. But again, thank you, man. I appreciate you for coming back. It seems like our weird, odd connection on opposite sides of the country has brought us together so that way we can have some good old-fashioned fun right here on the Stories in a Cemetery podcast. And, of course, give you some new ideas for the Tales from a Ghost Hunter podcast. So tell us a little bit about your podcast and maybe some of the episodes that you have coming up. Let's kick it off like that instead of doing like regular show notes like what I normally do.
Awesome. My podcast so far is just kind of like anything and everything paranormal. So anything I'm currently interested in or doing, I look into and pull up as a podcast. And then I'll do like seasonal stuff. So I'll try and find something that makes sense for that season. I'm probably going to adapt some of the lives I did for TikTok into podcast episodes. For Easter, I did a live on TikTok that I'll probably adapt next year for. So I did Bunny Man. I believe that's Illinois. So that's a
Bunny Man. Like, really?
Yes.
There's a cryptid called Bunny Man?
So it's a really fun story. Bunny Man is a cryptid / paranormal entity because there's actual murders that took place in Illinois, where there was a guy in a bunny suit with a knife, and there's actual evidence of that. But then there's this paranormal aspect to it where people are like, well, if you go down to the bridge at a certain time of night, then Bunny Man will come get you, and
sounds like Boogeyman stuff, but I get it.
Dude, it's definitely, it's an interesting story. So I'll probably turn that into a podcast episode for next year. Around Easter, I'm doing a Krampus episode, as I was telling you earlier, for Christmas, because I release on the 1st and 15th of every month.
Okay.
So the one that just released yesterday is the Barry Fitzgerald interview.
This is also going to be released, this episode we're talking about right now, late January. So your Krampus episode will have already been posted. So listeners can go and check out the Tales from a Ghost Hunter podcast and already hear that Krampus episode. So it should be already launched. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to remind you, like these episodes, we're pre-recording long in advance. So we have like a little bank of them But your Barry Fitzgerald interview, why don't you give us a quick synopsis of who Barry is and what that conversation entailed, and then we'll get into our episode of what we're into.
Gotcha. So the Barry Fitzgerald episode was really, really cool. Barry was the lead investigator for Ghost Hunters International, which was a TV series that ran multiple seasons. And Barry, during an interview in 2013, talked about black light and ultraviolet light being harmful to spirits, and that coincides with my own theory. So
kind of like what we talked about on our last episode.
Exactly. So I talked to him and I reached out and got a hold of him, and he's really cool, real humble guy, and shooting theories back and forth, man. I've never felt so intelligent in my life. Like talking to somebody that's just like on that level, talking about like iron content in your blood, interacting with the UV black light, and talking about like things that he's way beyond where I'm at, talking about, you know, other dimensional like creatures, and you know how everything is tied together and the paranormal field is one whole. And you get a lot of people that categorize, you know, in a way it really is like we're in a science field that people just don't want to accept yet, but we have different categories, just like you would have like a biologist, a neurologist, and a chemist, something, you know, we have,
sure,
you know, aliens, cryptids, and ghosts, and people don't want to connect them, but it's all intertwined. Like it all can be, you know, connected in one way or another. So hearing his opinions on that was awesome.
And folks, I've listened to this interview already. Like Josh kind of gave me a preamble, sneak peek into it. It was an absolutely stunning conversation, to say the least. So he is, when you hear him stumbling over his words, guys, like it's because there are really no words for the conversation that they had. It was fantastic, Josh, you know, and kudos to you for, you know, getting that interview of somebody that's, you know, pretty well known in the field. Obviously, you say Ghost Hunters International, and we all know, you know, who that team was. So again, kudos to you for, you know, being able to, I don't know, like knock heads with, you know, somebody along the same vein of, you know, what your theories entail. And I kind of feel the same way about our relationship. I just think it's way more humorous than so much like we make each other feel intelligent. I think it's more of a we get each other, and we may have a little bit of conflicting ideas at times, but I think that's what makes this great between you and I is there's pushback. And again, I know you agree because we've already kind of discussed this. But again, folks, when you're done listening to this episode, make sure you subscribe to Tales from a Ghost Hunter. And Josh, what platforms are you on before we mention what we're doing today?
Honestly, the only one I found myself on so far is Spotify. There's only 9 episodes into the podcast so far. By the time people hear this, it'll be, I believe, 11 episodes in, as I'm posting the 1st and 15th of every month.
Very cool.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how that branches out into other platforms quite yet.
And that's okay. That's what I can help you out with. So you and I will discuss that obviously after the show. So we folks are going to be bringing up another topic I've already discussed, and we are going to be talking about the Estes method, but we are going to take it to kind of a different level now that I have somebody on the other end of the mic to kind of combat this with different experiences, different theories. We're going to be discussing the Estes method like I did in a previous episode. But for those of you first-time listeners, I'm going to let Josh explain what the Estes method is and a little bit about where it came from. And then we're going to kind of expand on that to kind of see where it goes. And obviously, we're going to talk about our experiences. So if you've done the Estes method before, super great. Fast forward to halfway through the episode, you could hear about all of the extra shit that I do with the interactive ghost hunting experiences and some of the other theories wrapped around the Estes method. So Josh, why don't you kick us off with, you know, what is the Estes method for people that truly don't know? Let's explain it in, you know, kindergarten terms, and let's just break it down piece by piece. Like where did this all start from?
So the Estes method was created in 2016 by paranormal investigator Connor Randall, also a part of a group with Michelle Tate and Carl Piffler. I'm going to butcher that name. So they came up with it in the Stanley Hotel, and their whole theory behind it is sensory deprivation, taking away some of the senses will make this easier for us to become the mouthpiece, the speaker for the spirits, using the noise canceling headphones to listen to the spirit box as it's skipping through channels and basically blurting out those words as they come. And they also make sure you're blindfolded, so you are incapable of hearing and or seeing what someone might be asking, so that when you're spitting words, there's no interference of, people trying to fake it or make it work so that it correlates properly.
Okay, so I guess what I think one thing that we may not have touched on is the Stanley Hotel is located in Estes, Colorado, which is exactly
Yes.
where the title of this format actually began. And I'm going to argue later about the true origin of this type of experiment as we kind of get into some of the further pieces moving on. So essentially, folks, I mean, to kind of summarize and to get into what this is actually about, you put on a blindfold of some sort, so you can't visually see your, I guess, person asking the questions to spirit. You put on, obviously, a spirit box with a set of headphones and noise canceling over top of that, or noise canceling headphones in general. And you're listening to the white noise and basically channeling whatever the ghost wants to channel the messages through to the person that can actually hear the person talking. So there's essentially 2 people minimum that is needed for this type of experiment. This is not necessarily something you could just put on a blindfold and, just repeat whatever you hear. There's really no point to that. This is a 2-person job minimum. I personally, we do this on the interactive ghost hunting experience every single night. With that, sometimes, Josh, I blindfold 2 people. Have you ever done that before?
I have not. I've never done that. I'm sure that's interesting. I've seen it in some videos that I've watched back and forth. I was actually going to ask you about the type of headphones you use.
So we started off because I was giving out like disposable like earbuds, and then I would give them noise canceling headphones that didn't like transmit anything, just noise canceling, almost like you would find at a shooting range. I found that those were bulky to be kept in my gear bag. I do carry everything for the team. So having 1 or 2 sets of those in my bag took up a lot of space, even the foldable kind. So what I did was I transitioned over to some JBL, like normal 1980s and 90s, just headphone style. They do fold up a little bit easier. They do run flat. And I just tell them, and I usually set their volume to something where we can hear it, almost like blurting out of the headphone itself. So that way I know that they can't hear me. I will also, to kind of verify that they can't hear us, I will ask a few silly questions. Like, what color is a blue banana is usually my go-to, just because it's silly, it's not sensible in any way. And if one of the receivers actually says the word blue, I know they can hear me, and I will turn up their volume further. So that has never happened because, like I said, I usually set it up pretty good to where they can't hear me at all. I also use disposable blindfolds. I usually joke around that because I do buy them in bulk, because I do this every night, 1 to 2 people, sitting at the Charleston Library Society, and I hand them a blindfold, and I don't want it back for sanitary reasons, that you could buy blindfolds in bulk underneath the 50 Shades of Grey tab on Amazon. And I make that joke every single night, and I get a good chuckle out of people that are, especially if they're nervous about doing it, it kind of lightens the mood a little bit. So again, I do buy them in bulk. They're not expensive. I don't have like a personal mask with the Stories in the Cemetery logo on there. I probably should, just for, those regular investigations, but I usually just take a regular, disposable blindfold with me for when that occurs. I also have like a couple of like old, like, handkerchiefs that I've used, that kind of thing. But as far as headphones go, as long as it's loud enough, like, it doesn't need to be the noise canceling headphone necessarily. It just needs to be loud enough to where the transmitter, I usually call them the channeler, can't hear what me and the other guests are actually doing.
Right. And I actually looked this up and got the information on it. You need something that either matches or cancels out 60 to 70 decibels of sound. And that's the average sound wave for human speech.
And I think that's great science that somebody actually went to the, lengths to figure that out. But I mean, again, doing this every night, as long as it's loud enough, I mean, they might be able to hear the rumbling of my voice, but they're not making out what questions I'm asking. And I also leave the guest in the dark of who we're trying to make contact with. I think keeping it a controlled experiment, a necessity. If the person is sitting down and they already know who they're trying to contact, they're just going to spout off things what I've already told them in the story. So I leave them people in the dark, and I tell all the other guests who we're going to be making contact with and the story that goes along with it. So that way they can watch it unfold. So it's very interesting in that manner, and they can see like when somebody says something as a direct answer that it's a wow factor for the guest that knows the story. So I would recommend to anybody that's going to be doing this for their investigations that they not know everything they need to know about their ghost.
True. And it makes a good point because when you go back and find that information later and then can correlate it to an actual piece of evidence or something that actually makes sense, it's a lot more profound than it would be if you knew all the information prior, because then it's floating in your head and you start to hear what you kind of want to hear. It's almost like a pareidolia effect.
Correct.
So
that's exactly it.
And that kind of leads us into the next portion of this, is the spirit box you might be using during the investigation, because there's an SB7, SB11, and then the S box, which actually helps kind of get rid of that whole pareidolia, I think I heard this kind of situation, because it records itself.
And you forgot the SB7 Pro. So if I have two people blindfolded, one person has the S box by Ghost Stop, and then the secondary person is using the SB7 Pro, just because that volume level is kind of like, I hate to say it's a preset and harder to find when you're blindfolded, whereas with the S box, it's a wheel, so it's much easier for them to be able to finagle it. So I just make sure, like I tell everybody before I blindfold them, I'm like, don't touch the volume wheel. We want to make sure you're not cheating. But the SB7 Pro, much like the regular SB7, the volume control of it is hard to find, even if you have the buttons memorized of what is what where. So very interesting point about using the recording from the S box, because it is the only one that records the session, no matter what the volume level is. How do you feel about, like, let's say somebody thinks they heard something, and then you go back and listen to the recording? Have you ever done that before with this type of session?
I haven't had a chance to do it with a Estes session. I definitely would like to, because I feel like that really will like make that difference. Because in the past I would use an SB7 and then I would plug a recorder into the SB7 and then the headphones into it, so that it would record what the spirit box is recording, and then there would be another recorder recording what I'm saying. And it just turned into too many devices doing too many things in one little area.
Correct.
So
sounds very complicated.
Yeah. So I mean, it is nice though to go back through and listen to the recording of the spirit box and be like, okay, I did hear that. Like that is what it said. It's very validating. And then there are times where it's like, oh, like I fucked that up. That was not what they said. That wasn't what was meant to come through, and I said the wrong word. But most of the time there's so many words that come through, and only so many of them are actually meaningful. So most of the time you don't have that situation where you've screwed up that word and it meant something very serious where you needed it to be like the proper answer.
So I've actually seen before, especially with numbers, where somebody will say 1828, because we use slowed down spirit boxes for the muggles that are on the tour, and I keep them at that level unless of course I have somebody, and I hate to use this in this term, but like a higher caliber, meaning more experience, with spirit box work, including psychics and mediums. I try to keep psychics and mediums out of it, but if I have somebody that's willing to go under the fastest suite possible, with mainly white noise, I'll do it. But getting back to the numbers, if somebody hears 1828 and it actually said 1858, but 1828, what they originally said was what was, I guess, verifiable to a year or something of that nature to our ghosts that we're trying to contact. Why did that person say that one specific thing? Why did they interpret it that way? And that could be, it's not necessarily pareidolia because they don't know the history. So was it our ghost trying to manipulate the frequency so that the listener heard 1828 versus 1858, which was what was actually recorded when somebody goes back to review that recording? So there's a lot that can go into this. And I've seen, as many Estes sessions as I've hosted, it's crazy some of the things that I've seen. Using the double blinds, meaning two people being blindfolded, changing the sweep rates on two different listeners because one person is more experienced than the other. Just using the slowed down sweep rates to begin with is always interesting because you're going to get that plethora of the bullshit that comes through that doesn't mean anything. And you might actually find this helpful too. I found a niche of how to explain what to listen for when you're listening to a slowed down spirit box, and it's the 3 N's: names, nouns, and numbers. Those are the things that we can verify, especially through research. And I usually joke around with folks, like, if you ask your ghost, like, hey, how are you doing today? And they say, great, I had tea. I tell my guests, I don't give a shit because I can't verify that she had tea today. And again, I do make a lot of jokes during the interactive ghost hunting experience to keep it light. I get a lot of very nervous people that want to use the gear and they're all anxious and ready to go, but sometimes they're just very timid and they don't want to tell me the things that they're hearing because they don't think they're relevant. So I tell them, just tell me names, nouns, and numbers. If you hear one of those 3 things, and nouns makes it very broad. Even though she said, great, I had tea today, I still going to write down the word tea just because I want to see what's going to go on with the word tea when I do the research. So again, there's a lot that goes into how I host these sessions, and I have to make those, assessments and changes during the tour because sometimes my guests will flip the spirit boxes around from person to person. One person's better than the other. I choose the person that's better so we have a better experience. So there's a lot, but the pareidolia that you bring up, there's ways to control that to an extent. We've all seen some sort of, what's the name of the show where they actually do it all the time? The 2 ghost hunters.
There's quite a few. I think the one you're talking about is what is it? Adam Berry and
right.
Yeah, I forget what the heck that one's called.
Kindred Spirits.
There you go. Amy Bruni and Adam Berry.
I love watching, and that was part of the reason I watched that show so heavily because I'm not like a super fan of a lot of these newer shows that are out. But they were doing so many different experiments with the Estes method that, they had one person at a train and the other person was on a walkie-talkie in a house a block away, and they were getting live reactions to what was happening when the train passed by, kind of stuff. Yeah. Super interesting shit. Now, granted, we can't go to verify the experiment that they did. But the concept and the ideas behind it, to me, were phenomenal. What great ideas to really get behind this to kind of see where things are going to go. I guess to kind of wrap up this portion, and you've used the paranormal investigation workbook before on your last investigation, and the Estes method was actually added in as the 2024 edition. And did you do an Estes session during your last investigation at all?
I did multiple, actually. We did get some things that kind of came through, but it was kind of a, lack of better word, dead investigation for the parts that we did do Estes.
Okay.
I also used the spirit box kind of like we did in the past, where we just kind of set it up and it's spewing through a speaker and you can kind of go at it that way too. And I think I got more that way, but we used it like that in the brothel and did Estes in the church building. So in that That I think it might have been better if we had swapped it, but that was a very limited time period. Like I had to set up, get an investigation going, and tear down in 5 hours, and
Yeah, that's a lot.
and being the only one that was tech savvy that knew what he was doing, I had to set everything up myself. So I
Sure.
handed off some equipment, like, here, go play, and I set up equipment.
So how long were your Estes Method sessions, like in general? Did you time them? Do you have a general idea?
So I don't usually do more than like 15 to 20 minutes for an Estes session, just because I feel like it can get overwhelming for people. And even us as investigators, like, it's not good to be under that long. Like it's just not. It's a completely different mindset to be in an Estes method, in my opinion, because you're in that wavelength. So you're like the proper way that they say to do it, for the people that said that they invented the Estes method, is that you're supposed to be somewhere where you can rock, because they said you should be able to rock as you're doing the Estes method, because it helps kind of get you into that like mind frame so that you can channel better. And you see a lot of people actually on some of these shows doing that, where they're rocking back and forth, and they're getting into this like kind of groove. And some of them know you're supposed to do that, some of them don't, and just have started doing it naturally, because
I've seen that
part
before.
of, yeah, it's almost like some kind of subconscious reaction to having like those waves.
And I love the sound effects that you're creating with the rocking. That is not me adding it in, folks. Josh is literally rocking in his chair every time he says the word rocking. So, but I completely agree with muggles not doing this for long periods of time. I'll be honest. I think the longest time that I've been blindfolded and somebody kind of testing to see how it was going to go when we were testing this for the interactive ghost hunting experience, I want to say I stayed under for like 30 minutes. And somebody with, I guess, with some of the health factors that I do have, it can be very, very disorienting, uncomfortable. I'll be honest. For folks that are going to be on my ghost hunts in the future, I always give the warning that it can cause seizures. I've seen that before. I've seen people hyperventilate because it gets too intense. These are things that I have physically seen out of strangers, the muggles that come to my tour, and we immediately tap them out and get them out immediately for safety reasons. I don't take any notes during the session, just so I can keep an eye on everybody's breathing and make sure. And I always ask the family members nearby, like, hey, they're taking some pretty deep breaths. Is that normal for them? I will ask questions to the family member during the session just to make sure that the channeler is actually okay and not under any too much stress. So that's a great point, Josh, about bringing that up. And the reason why I asked you about your the length of time for your Estes Method sessions is that's how I base the scoring of the success rate of an Estes Method session. So just to kind of, I guess, prove a point for people that have done this, it's not a channeling every single time. And I'm sure, like you just mentioned it yourself, like you had some dead space where, you felt like you wasted 20 to 30 minutes, trying out this experiment with no reaction. The way I've based this, and I don't know if you went into the detail of the workbook, but I based this off of a 10-minute session. So if there are 2 direct answers, or I'll even say like 3 things that are super relevant that are completely verifiable, like I'll just use the year again, like in 1828, and that's the year that ghost was born, even though you didn't ask about it, I would still count that as kind of a verifiable answer. So 2 to 3 answers I would consider slightly successful in a 10-minute session. 4 or more answers I would consider a complete success. Obviously, only 1, or 0 is obviously unsuccessful. So there's really only 3 ways to score this. And again, for those of you that are going to be looking into the workbook, it explains it a lot more in depth. But with a 10-minute session, I feel like that's a great muggle start for somebody wanting to try this for the first time. And I say muggle, even for the amateur ghost hunters out there that have never done this before in a serious manner with other people controlling the situation. So you should be just a channeler and not know too much, and basically have enough people nearby in case something goes wrong, because things can and will go wrong. So before we wrap up this first half of the episode, Josh, was there any other details about the Estes method that you wanted to bring up before we go into some of the deeper things and the deeper shit that we've been doing with the Estes method? Anything else that you need to let our listeners know?
So there is another addition to this that people have been trying that is actually really interesting because it takes the sensory deprivation further, and it's the water tank. So I've seen them set up on investigations. They set up a makeshift water tank, and it's like a tent. So you walk into the tent and there's water in the tent, and they pour a bunch of salt in it, and they float with waterproof headphones in the sensory deprivation tank. So you are in a pitch black environment, floating in this water tank, listening to the, and it is.
I've seen this one other time, and I can't even think of what show, but it wasn't a ghost hunting show. It was like a psychic something, like something you would find on the Gaia network, where they were doing this type of experiment. So what was the result of what you've seen out of this? Have you seen this actually occur?
So I've seen it on the show, but I haven't seen it in person, because obviously this takes a lot more, because you can't just go to the store and buy a few cans of salt and pour it in the water. There's a special type of salt you got to use. Like, they use sea salt for this. You have to have a lot of water in this tank because you have to be floating. So it can't be like a kiddie pool where you can touch the bottom. You need to be free floating.
Nice.
So it's a large amount of work, and like I said, it's like a little tent. So it almost looks like a small circus tent, and it's that way so that they can zip you in, and you are in the pitch black. So then your person asking questions is outside the tent, asking questions, unaware of what is being said, and the person inside is completely unaware of what's happening outside.
Is it the mineral from the salt that is supposed to be enhancing this?
So it's the sensory deprivation part of it that's actually supposed to be the enhancer, because now not only are you taking away the ability to hear anything outside of the spirit box, you're also in pitch black like we do with the Estes method, but now we've completely removed a third sense of touch, because you are just free floating in a body of water.
Wow.
So now you are not feeling anything as well. So they have eliminated 3 of your senses in that experiment.
Got it. Love it.
You could take it farther even if you wanted to do it on that. Like, you could take it even farther than that and say, okay, well, clip my nose or, whatever else, and try and take away more senses. But this is, I say, almost like your perfect storm as far as like how effective that Estes method can really be. But at that point, like, that could be that's something that, like, you put somebody in there that doesn't have like any kind of issues. Like, they're not going to end up with a seizure. They're not going to end up having any kind of like panic attack, because this is an extreme situation where you're putting them in water, and even though they're able to float on the water, you could still drown in the water.
Right. Wow. I think I would still have somebody else in the tent just to kind of verify, just recording and like an infrared lighting type of deal.
Yeah. You could also do a live feed camera. You could have somebody at a base camp and do a live feed.
Yeah, but I would also want somebody there for safety.
Yeah.
If somebody is dozing off while they're floating in a small pool of water, things could happen, obviously, all the way up until drowning. I would want somebody there for an immediate response to that. So, wow, that's pretty intense. I'm gonna have to look up where the hell I saw that, but that's pretty cool. But I think on that note, that's going to take us to some of the extra things that we're going to be talking about right after this quick sponsor break.
Hey, bearded ghost hunters. Are you taking care of your beard with all natural products? The Magnanimous Beard Superstore has everything you need, from beard oils, shampoos, beard butter, beard balm, and so much more. You can have any of their products scented with one of their amazing 45 cents. Head over to www.yourbeardsuperstore.com and use code GHOST at checkout to receive $5 off your order. Both Nick and Josh use these products daily, and our beards look and feel great and smell great too. Head over to yourbeardsuperstore.com and use code GHOST for your discount on these magnanimous products. You won't be disappointed. If you have a white or silver beard, they even have specialized products that will help keep the coloring of your beard. Use code GHOST at yourbeardsuperstore.com. This ad is Zeus approved.
All right, guys, we're back. Thanks for listening to our sponsors. So again, you'll probably hear the same sponsors for at least the first, 8 to 10 episodes of this season. Who knows? But anyway, getting back into the Estes Method, it is time to take this even further than floating around in pools, getting waterproof headphones, and doing all of the things, that entail this rather remarkable insight into ghost hunting with controlled experimentation. So, Josh, have you ever heard or seen the Seer app?
So I believe I have the Seer app. I've never really used it. I've used a few of the products that they have. I like the camera that they have with the apps. So, yeah, the GhostTube Seer, and GhostTube SLS. So I have used the Seer. I'm mixing it up with one of the other ones because they have like 4 different apps.
Correct.
But I like the Seer. I haven't been able to correlate anything. Those photos I sent you from Vegas, I actually have not been able to correlate to anything. So Unfortunately, all 3 photos are a zilch.
Okay, so just for a brief second, taking a step back to the first half, I like to go through percentages because I do this on a much grander scale. Doing a plain old Estes Method with just a channeler or 2 for a 10-minute session, I've done this hundreds of times at this point. There's about a 30 to a 32% success rate of it being slightly successful or better. So I also love to give that concept so people aren't, again, not expecting to be a channeler every single time they do it, and I see a lot of self-proclaimers in that way. With the Seer app, let me first explain what this is and what it does, and what it's intended for, and then exactly how I use it with my muggles on the tour. What it does is Josh is laughing. We just made a joke like off the air. Josh apparently needs me, and I was trying to cough, and it wouldn't come out. So regardless, he says, "Don't die. We still need you." You only need me for my experiments, Josh. Just so I can give you the percentages of how shit works. Anyway, back to what the Seer app does. So it can work in one of 2 ways. You can just download the app, which is super great. You can use it that way. And what it does is it creates imagery using artificial intelligence. So yes, AI has reached the field of paranormal research. And from my understanding, it uses the binary code of EMF detection around the phone that is using the app or the device that's using the app. So all of our cell phones or tablets or anything that can carry like an Android Play or Apple Store app, we all have a magnetometer inside of that device. That's how you can download a compass app, and it can actually tell you what direction to go, just like an old school compass, like they would use, on pirate ships. But anyway, probably didn't use those on pirate ships. They had different ways of doing shit. But anyway, you guys all get the point. The whole point of this whole experiment is that you're going to get visual effects based off of basically the vibe of the ghost. And the visual effect can be an interpretation of what they're trying to channel to us instead of using the words around us for the channeler through that spirit box. So it's an amazing concept. And as soon as it came out, I had to try it. The free version of this app, and again, I'm not here to make a buck off of GhostTube. I'm not an affiliate with them, but you can get the free version and you can save up to 4 of those images at a time. If you get the paid subscription, I believe it's like $10 a month. It's infinite amount. So we do use this during our Estes Method sessions. However, kudos to my daughter, London. When we experimented with this to figure out how we were going to do this, it is intended for the user, instead of being blindfolded, to have a VR headset, kind of like the what's the name of the VR headset, Josh? I can't think of it.
The Oculus.
Thank you. The Oculus. We actually bought the one from GhostTube just because we wanted it to say Ghost on it when we were using it on the tour. And we experimented with it while listening to the white noise and radio chatter coming out of a spirit box. And when my daughter took those headphones and the VR headset off, now mind you, she's done this plenty of times. So I trusted her to be able to, I wanted to gauge her reaction. And she basically said, Dad, the muggles will not be able to handle this much sensory overload. Can we separate it? So that was a light bulb. So now I have 2 people blindfolded and 1 person wearing a VR headset. The VR headset person is also left in the dark of the history of the ghost. They have no idea what to expect. All they have to do is during the Estes Method session, while the 2 people blindfolded are repeating whatever they're hearing, in hopes of a conversation with me, the visual person, the VR person, is just explaining in simple terms what they see. 2 people, microphone, office. That's how I want them to explain it. And then we're able to see those images afterwards. So Josh, now that I've explained this to you and the listeners, what percentage of these images do you think are going to be accurate?
Honestly, based on my own experiences with it, I'm thinking we're looking at a 2 in 10 kind of breakdown as far as what's actually going to be pertinent compared to what is just kind of, stuff that comes up out of nowhere. And to your point, it's actually $14.99 annually. So it's a one-time a year payment for the Seer Ghost Tube app.
Got it. Well, thanks for that update. I'm going to probably astonish you with the number because, again, I have hundreds, if not probably close to 1,000 to 1,200 of these images at this point. And I've actually done the calculation of how many of them could be considered accurate to the ghost. 45%.
See, this is why I keep you.
However, let's talk about how many, because we do this for a 10-minute session. So there are some nights, and Josh, we've gotten 0 images, just nothing. And that's fine. You almost have to look at that as an anomalous thing all on its own for doing nothing in 10 minutes. So it should create something because it's constantly getting EMF readings into the phone to be able to create these images. We get an average of 4 out of a 10-minute session, but I have seen it go all the way up to 12 in a 10-minute session on a very heavy night. So an average of 4 per night. Lately, it's been probably closer to 2 to 3, just because we had to change locations for the same ghost. That's a whole nother story. But the fact of the matter is when I do the calculations and look at the images and count how many are relevant versus how many total there are, 45% accurate. So in essence, the images coming out of the Seer app is more of an accurate response than doing the Estes method itself.
That's interesting.
It
makes me almost want to use the Seer app more than I use the Spirit Box.
In conjunction is usually where you find the accuracy, though. So you might have somebody say the word flowers, and then all of a sudden the person under the Seer app has a bouquet of roses in front of them or a flower garden. And sometimes that's where the link might be. The flower garden or the bouquet of roses isn't meaningful by itself until you have what the person said to go along with it. It's a very interesting concept to be able to try to link the two. And some of this might sound like a stretch, but when you see this in real time, it is a holy shit moment. I see the jaw dropping of the guests that are witnessing this because they're the ones that are watching it. They know the story and they know how flowers or roses might actually relate to the story. But until the visual person says, or sees that they have flowers, and then the person listening says the word flowers, that's where the correlation might be. So don't count it out as using one or the other. Using them together is where you get a much, we'll just say it, gooder response.
You're supposed to be the English person. So.
I can make up words. I know gooder was not my coined term, but
it is now. It is now. You're gonna make a shirt that says "Gooder."
Oh, yeah, I probably should. That would be good. That would be the good
So,
shirt I've ever made.
right? So how many people? Because I'm imagining this scenario. You know, you got all these people, and they're just like flowers, and then the dude's sitting there like, yeah, I see a bouquet of roses. Like, how many people do you have that are just like, what? Let me see. Give me the headset. You know, like, do you ever have people that get into that area of like, they're like, oh, but I want to see what's happening and want to fight over it?
So, no. Here's why. I set the stage pretty well. For those that have taken, the ghost hunting experience, know this pretty well about me, that I do control each environment to its own level. With the location and the ghost that we're using this with, he's not always happy that I'm there, but he will still come out and chat with us or tell us to get the hell out of there, in his own very writer-esque way, in a very proper manner. The phrase again that I use is "know your ghost," and that's I'll stand true to that till the day I die. And then you guys will have to know me because I'll be the ghost. But anyway, I digress. Moving on. When this experiment is going on, it is more of a jaw-dropping moment, and everybody waits for me to ask the questions. Very rarely do I get somebody that says, "Can I ask Henry a question?" They are waiting for me to operate. And I find that if somebody does chime in and says, "Can I ask a question?" I usually get a better response. Lately, I've been asking the guests that are just standing there watching the whole thing unfold, whether we're having activity with it or not. Or first, they're astonished, and they know that they're going to be able to see the images when we're done, because it is done on a phone put into a VR headset. So I could take the phone out and literally slide through them, and I show all the guests what was seen, and I include those images into their report the next morning from, using my SITC scoring system, because that does count. And that the visual part of this is what's being added into the 2025 workbook, because I've had enough experimentation with it to show how I score each of the images that come through as being relevant to knowing your ghost pretty well through the research. It can be in conjunction with what is going on. It can have no relevance whatsoever, and that part of the experiment was a dud. But for those listening, and even for you, Josh, when you have more people that don't do this on a regular basis, I recommend to separate it. Have one person listening, have one person doing the visual effect. You and I have done a lot of research on the next portion of this, which is the Gansfeld effect. And I want to correct anybody that says Gansfield. It is not field. This is a German term, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right in that, Josh?
Correct.
So Gans being
entire,
and then Feld being area. Yeah, field or area. So entire field is where the Gansfeld effect comes into play. Josh, I'm going to have you try to explain this, because I've been talking a lot, and it's you're up. I mean, I got some questions and a lot to input on this Gansfeld effect, but this is taking it to a whole different fucking level. So tell us, what the hell is the Gansfeld effect?
All right, so I'm going to bore you all with a little bit of history on this. So,
take a nap, everybody.
So the Gansfeld experiment is a German thing. This was all done in Germany. Originally introduced in experimental psychology due to the experiments of the German psychologist Wolfgang Metzger. So 1899 to 1979. So this was still running until, kind of recently, probably around the same time that some of our listeners were even alive and born already. This was still happening.
Right.
So he demonstrated that subjects who were presented with the homogeneous visual field would experience perceptual distortions that could rise to the level of hallucination.
So let's unpack that for a second. Yeah, I mean, you just said a lot of very big terms. So what the hell does that mean?
So basically, he was trying to find a way to put people into a state of mind by forcing people's minds to race and start to hallucinate. And they were trying to use this to find a way to create some kind of mental psychic connection. So they would ask people, questions about a specific person and say, okay, well, in your mind, go find this person. This is where they are, and this is what they might be doing. Tell me what they're wearing. Tell me this. Tell me that. And they would try and have them go find somebody, explain like what was going on. And it was done by using red lights, ping pong balls that were cut in half and put over their eyes. They did this where it was like 42 experiments performed by parapsychologists. So the original parapsychologist, Ray Hyman, went through and did the experiment and found that there was a hit rate of about 32%. So now they only gave it a percentage rate of about 25% for it to be correct, because there was 4 options that could have happened for what they were asking these people.
So what were the 4? Do you know what the 4 options were? Like, did they categorize like how the hits worked?
Not to the knowledge that I was able to pull up.
Okay.
So they gave me like the information of like it was 4 different options. There was a 25% random hit rate, and they got 7% more when they did those original 42 experiments. Now, somebody else went in and was like, no, this was done wrong. This needs to be redone. And they redid this between 1974 and 1982.
Okay. Because what you're telling me is they had this 25% hit rate, and then they were getting like 7% more when they did like things a little bit more focused. So that means when they were giving like anywhere between 30 to 32% was an accuracy piece, which is exactly what I just said about the Estes Method session by itself. Am I correct in that assumption?
Correct.
So okay, so that makes sense. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to kind of clarify for my own brain so I can like digest all of this info, because it's a lot.
It is. Now the next guy said, okay, he took 240 participants and they contributed 329 sessions.
Okay.
And he got the same hit rate. So he still got that 32% hit rate.
Wow.
And there's a lot of different sources for this that, kind of go through the combinations of how they did it. And there's a lot of people that are very critical of like, no, you should have done it this way. And you gave too much information to your subject. And it becomes a very kind of like mishmashed, who's is, right, who's wrong kind of scenario.
So the questions and the things that I found out about this, I mean, you mentioned one word of it being a homogeneous light. So that would mean that the light is constant, through the ping pong balls, which we're going to get into the, I guess, evolution of this experiment in just a moment. But imagine 2 ping pong balls and 2 red lights are in the center of it, like giving that luminescent constant red through the ping pong ball. And that's what the homogeneous light is. And it doesn't flicker. It doesn't turn on and off. It doesn't fade in and out. It's homogeneous. It just stays on. Some of the things that I found when researching this was it started off that way, but then they started finding that flickering the light, especially the red light, actually had a different effect. Did you read or find anything about that?
No, I did not actually. And it's interesting when you think about it, because red light actually doesn't affect our eyes. So you can turn on a red light in a pitch black room, and then when you turn it back off, you've not lost your night vision. Your pupils do not dilate according to the red light like they do with a white, blue, or green light.
Interesting that you bring that up, because the Seer app, going back to the visual stimuli that we just talked about, also has a Ganzfeld function in it. And it has, because when you put on the VR headset, you could be in blank empty space. I usually set up a background so the watchers aren't falling asleep. But with the Ganzfeld effect, it is just open space. But there is a red light that is pulsing off in the distance that does create that exact feature of a flickering light. with somebody who I guess has a history of seizures, I have attempted this, not in the full capacity of somebody monitoring and we're going through a ghost type session. I just wanted to see if I could handle it, just to kind of take it from there. And it had no effect on any of my seizure-esque type of symptoms or triggers, so to speak, which I found very, very surprising. So what you just said makes complete sense. Not to say that it can't cause seizures, because if you have a history of seizures and you want to try this, just make sure you have somebody monitoring. And if you have any kind of triggers for that, please take off the ping pong balls or the VR headset, so forth and so on. Josh, have you looked at the Seer app version of the Gonsfeld effect, just so you can see what it looks like?
I have. I believe you mentioned it before, and I actually looked to see what it was like, and it's interesting. It is very interesting. I feel like using an actual red light is more effective and safer because, like I said, a red light does not dilate your eyes the same way a white light does. So like a strobe light is activating your pupils. It's making the dilation constant, which is kind of what starts issues for people that do have seizures. Now, I'm not a doctor or any kind of professional, so I'm not saying like this is, the way you should do it and this is the way you shouldn't do it because you can't have a seizure with a red light. I don't know that. But in my, opinion, with what I do know, a red light is a safer alternative because it is not causing a pupil dilation.
So the other pieces that I've read about this, and again, it seems like you probably did more research on this than I did. I just may have had a different pre-knowledge of what this thing actually is, because we've joked around about it from previous TikTok lives of yours. But the whole purpose of it was for when you're listening to the white noise, because I believe that they were using only white noise, not like radio frequency, anything like that. Like they created a white noise. Mm-hmm. And then they were basically using this homogeneous light, meaning it's not flickering or anything like that, is that it was supposed to take away so much of your sense of the real world. And your mind was supposed to fill in the blanks to figure out what the real world actually was around you. So the other thing was that there was supposed to be like a preamble of like 15 minutes of doing this session before anybody should start asking you questions. So that way you can get into that state of mind. Now, you and I just both recommended doing this between 10 to 20 minutes only during a regular Estes Method or Seer app type of session. So, I mean, this is a deep state type of mindset. And again, I haven't done it yet just because I need, obviously, team members to monitor and everything like that. And I also want to be in a very well-known haunted location of what I've already investigated. This is not something I will be doing on the interactive ghost hunting experience, just because of the cause of an effect that could happen with people with seizures, nor do I want to cause anybody that's never had a seizure to actually have one. But I think it's fascinating. It evolved from ping pong balls to what, Josh? Have you seen anything else that is evolved from the ping pong balls?
Well, it evolved from the ping pong balls to the Delco goggles, which we talked about prior. And I know you're in love with these Delco goggles.
And I'm in love with them because they're
so expensive. They're so expensive.
They are. However, I'm going to go in between ping pong balls and the Delco goggles. And folks that don't know what the Delco goggles are, they were created by Mike Delcore. So Delco being short for his last name. But they look very steampunkish. Like they're badass. And they actually have the lights plugged into them. And I do believe that they do have that flicker effect to them. There's some videos on YouTube. So I honestly think I'm going to write a blog post about this episode. So I'll probably have to link that YouTube video into that blog post. So in the event that there is one, folks, it'll be in the show notes so you could check that out. But in between ping pong balls, Delco goggles, there was another company that created another set of these goggles. So I want to say that they were like cremation investigations or something along those lines that I found at crematory investigators. But they took a pair of welding goggles, which makes a little bit more sense for that full homogeneous type of light coming through. And there's two wires going up to the, I guess, southeast and southwest portions of the goggle. So there's two wires coming out this way for the, Josh being able to see me physically. And those wires, I believe, plug in, obviously, to an outlet of some sort to provide it. So the person has to stay stationary, which we always recommend for anybody being blindfolded and trying to do paranormal research through this with experimentation. But it was fascinating because it looks very rustic, and they are the same price as the Delco goggles. So they were both set at when I looked them up yesterday, they were about $150 for each set of the Delcos versus the crematorium, whatever the investigative team was that made those. Now, if they're still in production, I want to say like that middle set was like made in the early 2000s, late 90s, if I'm not mistaken. But they look pretty cool. But again, if you have the Seer app, I would say try that first if you're capable and you have people to help you out with it. But the Gonsfeld effect is, to me, would be fascinating. White noise only. We could use spirit box work, but I would love to try it with just that white noise, just to kind of see like what actually fills into it. And it is supposed to produce like hallucinogenic type of effects. Could be an alternative way to experiment with your very haunted location. I wouldn't recommend doing it if you're not getting much activity out of your space, because then it's probably not going to work well. I would definitely do it if you are feeling like you're having a solid investigation, you're getting some good hits, things that are verifiable. I would take it to that next level, like towards the end of your investigation.
And some added information here. They also use something called pink noise during the experiments. And okay. Pink noise is basically white noise filtered on a higher frequency. So it's a higher frequency of the white noise, and they call it pink noise. And you can actually try the Gonsfeld effect on your Oculus Quest, apparently.
That's pretty cool.
I was just looking up different types of goggles to see if I could find the group you were talking about, and apparently Quest has some kind of Gonsfeld like sensory deprivation thing you can try on the app.
And believe it or not, Josh, most of the information I found actually came from like health websites. So healthline.com, webmd.com, like these are all things that talk about the Gonsfeld experiment. Wow. So I found that fascinating. Let me just do a quick little search here because I want the name of them as well and who the makers of them were, so that way you can see what I'm talking about. Empty Casket Paranormal.
That's an interesting name.
Very rustic looking, but it also gives you the insight of like how they were made. And if you look at the last picture on the website, it says that Dave Schrader is the one wearing the goggles.
Interesting. It says Bill Bryan when you look up Empty Casket Paranormal on any kind of like, I'm on Instagram right now.
Okay.
Looks like they might have a store.
Yeah, they have an online shop. So it looks like they have Facebook, YouTube, obviously, and a Pinterest page that I'll definitely be checking out. But I guess to kind of get this episode wrapped up. So, folks, if you wanted to check it out, it's at emptycasketparanormal.com. I'm not an advocate for them. It was just something I found during my research. So, again, very interesting concept. Josh, this has been, holy shit, dude. Where do we get like these crazy-ass topics that we discuss? I mean, they go pretty in-depth. Again, I'm glad you're here, man. And I know what's funny is your shirt says, I'm here. Yeah. Oh, but you got the I'm here for the booze shirt on. I didn't see the whole shirt. But I am glad that you're here because I feel like these conversations go way further in depth than me just rambling on for 30 to 45 minutes. So listeners have just gotten a full taste of what the Estes Method is, the history of it, how to expand it, and how to operate it in safe ways. And I think that's a huge aspect of what we brought to the table today. So, I mean, how do you feel? Do you think we covered enough of the Estes Method for somebody to get the full gist of this without trying to create just a quick TikTok 2-minute video of what it actually is?
I mean, I think we covered it pretty well. Obviously there's those normal like do not do's with stuff like this, like those warning labels that end up on a bottle of medication because somebody did it and you're like, why would they do that? Like,
Right.
Don't walk around while you're doing the Estes Method blindfold or, something like that. But I think we covered pretty much anything and everything you could think about to get somebody really started on this concept.
Yeah, I think so too. And folks, if you have more questions for me or Josh about this, considering we do have the experience with it, aside from the Gonsfield effect, again, I'm not going to take credit for knowing too much about that yet. But again, shoot us questions. Obviously, you can find Stories in a Cemetery mainly on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Our YouTube channel, I know some of you are watching our YouTube, but that is for the investigations. Those are the videos that are taken by the guests, during the investigations with me while we tour through Charleston. But if you have questions for Josh, where can we find all of your stuff?
So you look up Tales from a Ghost Hunter on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I just started an X because, who knows what's going to happen with some of these social media platforms that are supposedly illegal next year. So
it's pretty safe to say.
Yeah, I'm expanding my horizons. I got on X. I always said I wouldn't do it, but I did it. So
I used to have a Twitter account. I probably still have an X account unless they canceled it. But anyway, folks, I really appreciate you listening. Josh really appreciates you listening and checking out his podcast, Tales from a Ghost Hunter. And until next time, Josh, what's our next topic? Do we have a name for that topic yet?
Honestly, I think our next topic for the next episode is going to be, it might just be interesting items to use in the paranormal or alternative, paranormal investigation devices, something along those lines. We got to come up with a better verbiage for it to come up with something that sounds interesting so people aren't just like, what the hell what is this?
Extra shit for ghost hunting.
Things you might need, things you might be able to use.
I like the phrase. I mean, we've kind of discussed this already, but just interesting concepts for ghost hunting. Not that some of the tools that we're using now don't fall in that category, but these are things that I think regular ghost hunters or even just fans of TV shows don't always think of. So guys, stay tuned for that next episode. It will be out in 2 weeks. And thank you again for listening. Until next time.
Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stories in the Cemetery podcast. You can follow your host, Nicholas McGurr, on most social media platforms under the name Stories in the Cemetery. If you'd like to follow co-host Joshua Amen, you'll find him under the name Tales from a Ghost Hunter. Be sure to check out the show notes for any links to specific articles written by your hosts and all the references used to create this episode. Happy hunting. We'll see you on the next episode of the Stories in the Cemetery podcast.